Why do I like Kingdom Come: Deliverance? This question is a genuine one because I honestly don't know. I have no idea why I like this game as much as I do. By all rights, Kingdom Come: Deliverance should not be so compelling as it is. The game is tremendously glitchy, the writing is all over the place, it's stiff and awkward to play and certainly to get used to, and the save system is a little naff. When I first started playing Kingdom Come, I spent half the time confused beyond belief and the rest of the time shouting at the bullshit that was smearing itself across my screen. But I had paid almost £44 British for this game and I was damned if I was going to let it beat me. Now, I am normally the kind of person who, if a game doesn't grab me within the first few hours, or if it frustrates me too much in that time frame, I will tend to put it to one side and not play it again. Examples of this include Army of Two, which I've owned for about 8 years at this point but never finished, Dead Island Riptide, the original Nier. It's a long list and we'll be here all day if I start listing unfinished games in my library. But I'd put so much money into this bloody game and I'd heard so many humorous stories about it that I was determined to get my money's worth out of it. So I parked my arse and cracked my knuckles and delved into Kingdom Come: Deliverance. And then something weird happened. I started to have fun. The purpose of this video is to try to understand why this buggy, mechanically overcomplicated and slightly messy behemoth of an RPG is still demanding my attention in spite of all its rampant flaws. Do you remember when games used to have booklets? I definitely do, and the first thing I would always do when I picked up a new game was read the booklet. I recently bought Dragon Quest VIII for my partner and good god, look at this thing, it's an actual booklet and it's beautiful. The thing is that there's a reason that booklets were so beloved, aside from having the opportunity to showcase artwork for the game, provide character descriptions or set the scene for the game. They also serve to explain the more complex mechanics, particularly in cases where the game itself either struggled or neglected entirely to do so. And on occasion they could provide invaluable aid. Best example of this that I own is the booklet for Nocturne, or Lucifer's Call as the copy that I have is known as. This booklet is incredible, finely detailed and full of handy hints and tips, but the best thing about it is the beginner's guide at the back of the booklet. There is literally a walkthrough in here for the first few hours of the game, it's fantastic. The reason I bring this up is probably fairly obvious to anyone who's played Kingdom Come. The game is really bad at explaining how its mechanics work, and I genuinely do not know if this is a deliberate choice or not. Kingdom Come was heavily marketed on its dedication to realism, both in the foundation and execution of its world and in its mechanics. If you're unfamiliar with Kingdom Come, let me try to explain. Each of the game's core mechanics, from sword fighting to defense, herbalism, speech and so on and so forth, is represented by an experience bar that is essentially analogous to the experience bars in Morrowind and Oblivion, functioning in much the same way. The more you use a skill, the more it levels up, and leveling up your skills also contributes to your overall main level, improving your abilities by doing. Since the player character, Henry, is just your average 15th century peasant, there are an awful lot of things he can't do, like beat trained swordsmen in combat without any kind of training himself, or effectively block even with a shield equipped, or hell, Henry can't even read at the outset of the game. If this all sounds tremendously off-putting, don't worry, that's because it is. The game begins by thrusting you straight into a normal day in Henry's life, having you wander into town to collect on a debt, where your low speech skill will invariably get you into trouble since at the start of the game you won't know how anything works. The game doesn't tell you that using your skills will improve them, it just kind of throws you into the mix and lets you get on with it, which is pretty commendable, I must say. The further through the past decade we've gone, the more games have been holding our hands to make sure that we don't get upset, like the delicate little sunflowers that we are. Having a game that shoves you out the front door with a boot up the arse is definitely a breath of fresh air. But having said that, some kind of direction would have been, you know, helpful, or at least mildly appreciated. When I contrived to get myself into a fistfight with someone who beat the absolute shit out of me, I had no idea what I'd done wrong, and since the combat in the game is a bit of a chocolate teapot until you actually get good, Jesus, I struggled to so much as land a glancing blow on the gent, and this is when I discovered that the game has a very, very interesting save system. And by interesting I mean fucking appalling. Okay, so it's not that bad. The way that it works is like this. The game will save when you acquire a brand new quest, and sometimes when you complete a quest as well. It will also save if you sleep in a bed you own or rent, or occasionally in a random arse bed out in the middle of nowhere. Aside from this, you can only manually save if you have an item known as the Saviour's Schnapps, something that is in rather limited supply at the start of the game and is hideously expensive to buy. However, fear not, you can brew Saviour's Schnapps at any alchemy bench, provided you have the correct items and have at least 1 point in alchemy, and you understand how the alchemy bench works without having to Google it, and provided you can find an alchemy bench. Or you can just, steal schnapps from people, which I, as a good and upstanding moral citizen, totally never did. So I'll concede that the save system isn't bad per se, but I would hazard a guess to say that the reason many people consider it to be dismal is largely down to the fact that since you can't just save wherever you like, and since the combat is very unforgiving, if you find a fight isn't going your way, you don't have the luxury of just reloading and trying again. You have to either accept the loss, surrender and risk losing money, items or your head, or you have to try to run away, which is a damn sight easier if you have a horse, believe me. The second biggest issue that I would say is a far more understandable concern, as someone whose previous house apparently lived in an electrical black hole, is power outages. Let's say that you jog about for an hour or so, hunting game in the Neuhof woods, skinning for pelts, levelling up your bow skills and what have you. You gather a ton of supplies, pelts that will earn you a fortune, and suddenly a power cut strikes. You will lose everything since the last save, so unless you have an awful lot of schnapps tucked away in your pockets, you are going to be suffering under the constant oppressive weight of potentially having to redo hours of progress through no fault of your own. Otherwise though, the skills themselves do make sense in terms of usage and progression. Most egregious at the beginning of the game is definitely the combat. There are 3 main skill trees, axe, sword and mace, and I can't speak for the axe or mace trees as those types of weapons never appeal to me, but the swordplay feels hideously awful and unresponsive. Mostly. In keeping with the theme of the rest of the game, when you first acquire a sword you're not told how to use it, but then you're not really meant to. There's a degree to which the game expects you to progress the main plot before you acquire any semblance of decency in swordplay, and this was a mistake that I made initially. As is traditional RPG habit, once I was out of the opening village I went for a merry wander around the countryside, died 10,000 times due to poor sword skills, and angrily blamed the game for being a piece of shit. The thing is though, it wasn't the game, it was me. It wasn't the game's fault that I was actively ignoring the fact that Peasant Henry, traumatised by the deaths of his parents and destruction of his village, who was supposed to be talking to Sir Radzig to help get revenge for said destruction, was not even remotely competent with anything, let alone a bloody great big sword. Sure, it's easy to turn around and say, well, the game didn't tell me that I had to do that, but that's the game's prerogative, and of all the things it does not at all clarify, the fact that the experience hinges on realism is one of the few things it does spell out for you, in loading screens, in the marketing, in the fact that if you try and read a book before you learn how to read, the letters are jumbled up and nonsensical. And I suppose it's that realism that's just so compelling, even though the sheer bloody-minded arduousness that is Kingdom Come Deliverance's combat, storytelling, awkward mechanics, glitches, lying whores who run off to sell guards I did something I definitely didn't do, icons popping up every which way that are never explained unless you poke around in the buffs screen, being wanted for jail time in a village you've never even been to, being persistently reminded that bad behaviour will be punished even if all you did was stop to talk to someone, being fleeced by guards who have no reason to believe that you stole all of that man's clothes. Even through all of that nonsense, I was sure I saw a gleaming light at the end of the tunnel. The game's pride in its marrying of escapism and realism, its fantastic attention to detail, and its loving recreation of 15th century Bohemia is at the very least commendable. But there's something else about it as well. Something that, almost 70 hours in now, I'm beginning to grasp. At the risk of briefly becoming a walking cliché, the way this game functions somewhat reminds me of Dark Souls, not of the game itself, but rather the way it feels to finally conquer the quote-unquote hardest game ever. There's a certain sensation that floods you when you defeat Ornstein and Smaug for the first time, when the banging of your head against a brick wall suddenly yields and reveals a treasure trove on the other side. A feeling that all of your hard work has paid off, that the bandits who could once kill you in 2 hits now cower in fear before you. A feeling of extraordinary accomplishment. If there's one thing that Kingdom Come does do well, whether intentionally or not, it is the fact that when you finally begin to master its mechanics, when you pick a lock for the first time, when you successfully pickpocket someone, when you manage to convince a guard that your pockets are full of air and not that naked man's clothes. You truly do feel as if you have accomplished something magnificent. It feels as though you have surmounted the impossible, turned a bumbling peasant into a fearsome warlord, and you've done it all through practice. Suddenly, the game becomes a rags-to-riches tale of empowerment, wherein the crux of the game is not just about transforming Henry into a powerhouse in plate armour, but also about hammering the player into the ground, to rid them of all hubris and big-headedness. The current gaming generation has been set in its ways for so long that we're used to having everything handed to us on a silver platter. As much as I lauded The Last of Us for its enthralling experience, how much of an accomplishment was it, really? Joel was already a rugged and grizzled survivor. He already knew what he was doing. There was no real conflict of realism and escapism because there was really no way to lose the fight in the first place. There was never a need for the player to carefully weigh the pros and cons of raiding that bandit camp, being unsure of exactly how much progress you'd lose if you died, because an autosave was always just around the corner. Still though, I'm certainly starting to sort through my thought process on this game. I'm not convinced that this is exactly why I like it so much, or at least not entirely the reason. The truth is, this is the kind of game that I should hate. I don't play games for realism or to feel like a puny weakling with smaller muscles than me. Predominantly, I play games to be scared, to feel the oppressive weight of a haunting, horrifying atmosphere upon my shoulders. Other times I play games to feel like a magnificent, stalwart swordsman with an impossibly beautiful girlfriend and a wicked set of scars. And from time to time I just want to grab a big friendly gun and set a few demons aflame. And maybe that's what it is. Kingdom Come is definitely not a survival horror game, and it's definitely not The Witcher. And yet, as I wandered through the woods, hunting boar and skinning hares, I accidentally stumbled across a camp of cumans and had to sprint away with my tail between my legs in a desperate bid not to lose an hour of progress. The fury I felt wasn't anger at the game for being unfair, for being too hard or too realistic. It was anger at myself for making such an elementary mistake, for knowing that all of the tools I needed to succeed were somewhere else and I was far too busy poaching in another huntsman's land to pay it any heed. I knew well before I ever started playing this game that it was aiming for a realistic, historically accurate depiction of 15th century Europe, and I still ignored the game's quiet recommendation that I should really look into learning the basics before I start sprinting around the woods like a bumbling buffoon and promptly getting myself killed. So how did I remedy that? By remembering that those who fight and run away live to fight another day, by sprinting away, making a metric shit ton of money, and paying to have folks teach me new moves and improve my skills, by reading books, learning how to brew potions, winning an archery tournament. And by the time I had put the proper effort into learning how to defend myself, I found more and more pathways opening up before me. I didn't need to lurch in like an ungainly lumberjack. I could remove my noisy armour, sneak in and smother the cumans in their sleep, or procure a dagger and slit their throats. I could lure them away one by one so as not to be overwhelmed, or I could poison their wine, stampede their horses. Suddenly possibilities began to open up before me, and before I knew it, I was really enjoying myself. In teaching both Henry and myself how to make the most of what I initially lambasted as lacklustre mechanics, I suddenly discovered that the game had always been prepared to provide the ways and means to survive and thrive. I just hadn't bothered to seek it out. Kingdom Come is very much a reward through punishment, learning through failure kind of game. It provides exactly the experience its opening hour actively pushes. Henry, a blacksmith's son, thrust into a turmoil he never expected to be embroiled in, devoid of skill, devoid of charm, forced to make his way in the world and bloody well grow up. The game is about carving a path through Bohemia, avenging your family, and learning that through trial and torment, even the lowliest of peasants can make something of themselves. Or you can run around picking daisies all day and getting drunk with your mates. Whatever takes your fancy.